This is the title of the piece, Ron DeSantis' Misguided Attack on Disney's Legal Status, by Charles Cook. Like I said, if you want to read the article for yourself, well, you can either Google it or I'll post it on Locals for easy access for everybody. This is what Cook writes. He goes, the governor already won. There's no need for the Republican Party of Florida to salt the earth. That's the subtitle. He writes, yesterday, Governor Ron DeSantis issued a proclamation instructing a special session of the Florida legislature to review whether Walt Disney World's 50-year-old independent special district status should be rescinded now that the Walt Disney Company has had the temerity to annoy the Republican Party. Yes, don't you just love little rhetorical phrases like that? The temerity to annoy the Republican Party. It's grooming children is what Disney was doing. So it's not just a political tit for tat here. As I said, it's really important what Disney was doing. They aren't just advocating against legislation, which is their right to do as a corporation. It might not be wise, but it's their right to do it. But they admitted that they are trying to, well, queer your children. So yes, it does annoy the Republican Party, and for good reason. Cook says Disney's status, DeSantis wrote, should not be subject to a review meant to ensure that it is appropriately serving the public interest as required by the Constitution of Florida. So this is a really interesting little phrase here, which is sort of, it's in the first paragraph, but it's stuck on the back of the sentence, and it's something that even conservatives aren't talking about enough, that this is required by the Constitution of Florida. These independent special districts, the Constitution of Florida requires that the legislature constantly reevaluate whether these districts are in the best interest of the people of Florida. And just because the legislature in Florida hasn't done this, hasn't reevaluated whether these districts are in the best interest as often as some might like, doesn't mean that they shouldn't now. This is required by the Constitution. Cook says, this escalation represents an ugly and ill-conceived mistake, a blemish on DeSantis' otherwise mostly excellent gubernatorial record. Those who've defended the move argue that sticking it to Disney in this matter demonstrates that the Republican Party is willing to fight and will thus represent a victory for conservatism. But this, Cook writes, is silly. Admirably, Governor DeSantis has already fought Disney and he has already won. The policy about which Disney chose stupidly to complain is now Florida law. It passed both houses of the state legislature. It was signed by DeSantis, who had been correctly defiant in the face of Disney's gripes, and it enjoys the support of broad majorities of Floridians. There is no need for the Republican Party of Florida to salt the earth here. It has prevailed in every particular. So that's all correct fact-wise. It's correct fact-wise that DeSantis did defeat Disney at the legislative level, but it's not just the legislative level that we're talking about. Remember, right at the beginning of this show, I said that there were two different things that Disney has done. Disney has both admitted behind the scenes that they are actively trying to indoctrinate children in queer theory, and they have publicly advocated against this legislation. Those are two different things. And just because DeSantis did defeat Disney with the parental rights and education bill at the legislative level doesn't mean that their business, which they have said is now dedicated to this queer agenda, they are dedicated to that agenda while enjoying privileges bestowed upon them by the Florida government, by the Florida state legislature, the Florida state constitution, the Florida state governor. And that is what we're talking about today. That is what we're talking about. So when people say that Florida is just being vindictive or DeSantis is being vindictive, that this is retaliatory for free speech, it isn't about the legislative argument as much as it's about what Disney is bringing, what values Disney is bringing to Florida. And in that sense, it's perfectly appropriate for DeSantis to call a special session of the legislature and the legislature to evaluate whether Florida's independent special district status, their governing status, their district, is still appropriate, whether this is in the best interest of the people of Florida and the taxpayers there. And I think when people like Charles Cook conflate these two things, the legislative part of what Disney is doing and their agenda, their queering agenda, that's a mistake. And it will lead you, it's a false, not a false premise, but it's an incorrect premise that leads to, not a very good result, which is what we're seeing here from his article.